Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host of my new podcast, Pause and Rewind. I'll be chatting to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now. But how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now. Because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes, and what makes our guests tick. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? Experiences and really taking people on a journey. It's something that I try to do with this podcast and in my work. And Maylis is definitely a massive inspiration and role model for me. This conversation is not short, so I advise you to get comfortable. But it's also not going to be particularly the most easy listen. I'd like to just put a trigger warning out there. We do tackle some serious, triggering topics, including suicide, addiction, and abortion. So please do take care of yourself while listening. But there's also a lot of joy in this conversation as we listen to Maylis's origin story, what led her to the person that she is now. I am immensely grateful for this conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it too and take a lot from it. Hi there, Maylis. Welcome to Pause and Rewind.
Hello, Neil.
It is so good to see you.
Me too. I've missed your face. I'm happy to see you.
Oh, you too. Honestly, Maylis, so I have no before I knew you, I knew about you for a couple of years because I followed We Create Space. I now work at We Create Space, and you don't anymore. But I just want to say you were a pivotal reason as to why I was so invested and why I love working for We Create Space.
You know what? It really touches my heart to hear you say that. Because I'm sure you know this, in being like in the back end of work, like it becomes quite challenging to even see the impact that you have. And when I knew that you were coming on board, and I almost also to a point like was like, wow, like Neil's coming on, and we didn't get the chance to work together properly, but I also was a fan. And I
Oh,
was like
thank
tooting you in like a panel that you did with like Alex Dessar, Jackie Roldaga, and I think Eva Echo. So
yeah.
love you that you love my peoples. I love you for just being, you. And I'm so happy we get to do this. So it's like our time together, finally, right?
It's lovely to spend this time with you, and yeah, massive cheerleader. Always have been, always will be. Maylis, you are an inclusion consultant, a coach, a beautiful storyteller. Um, how are you? What are you doing right now?
Oof. It's a very deep question, and I'm trying to find levels to it. But on the personal level, I'm doing much better than I was like a couple of months ago. Because there's been a lot of changes, as you know. I've moved away and transitioned from my job as well, and also family stuff. So bereavement on the way, and I'm in a really beautiful period of observing change on myself and where I was. Also near like something that I'm doing, or I've been doing, is like it's this month, April, is like my 3 years being back in my native home. So that was big, and thinking I could never imagine I would have done that. And thinking who have I become? Like, who am I now? And as a professional, as an executive, as someone who sees inclusion and who's processing stuff on a level, life is looking very hopeful. And it's important to say that in the background of what we know is happening in the world. We don't often get to access pockets of hope, but I am just actively not trying to lose sight of that. So life is looking like a lot of opportunities, specifically in inclusion space. So I've been traveling a bit in Paris, so trying to find language, because French is my first language, but we'll get into that, first native language, but we'll get into that. We're trying to find alignment in the language that we use in Anglo-Saxon countries, because there's a need for inclusion in France, but the language is not yet mathing up or adding up. So I'm diving into that, and also really diving into this idea of safety, how we find internal safety as people who are essentially going to advocate for ourselves for the rest of our lives. How do we continuously find that level of internal safety to stay in conversations that are difficult and sometimes take in information that we don't always align with, and still valuing the bonds that we share with people. So it's a lot, and it
Yeah.
might come out as a program, it might come out as something, and but I'm exploring and I'm writing. So that's for you to know. I'm writing, and that feels fantastic.
Exciting stuff. Really looking forward to whatever's next. So living back in Côte d'Ivoire,
Hmm.
what does the world look like there for you?
Oof. you know, it looks again, like as I was saying, hopeful. It looks much better for me, because I say for me, and this is me as a queer, bisexual person who's living, with a partner who's a man. So I have a lot of privileges, and I have to kind of, pocket that so people are aware. Um, but it's also looking positive and hopeful, because it's brought me to really think about how we make activism happen in West Africa, in the context where we're thinking about post-colonial learning, where we're thinking about culture, tradition, when there's a lot of history that's not quite, hasn't even emerged yet. African people, to me, sometimes I find, um, it saddens me to a point, because we're the people who have to go to the West to experience our artwork. There's
Right.
galleries and museums that have kept away some of, the core elements of our traditions, and we don't even know what they are. And yet now most people are embracing, religion, and whether it's Islam or Christianity, and we're kind of disconnected from the things that used to animate us, because we used to believe in spirits, and we had masks that we worshipped, and now there is a sense of wanting to move away from that and demonizing that. And I'm really thinking that if we are to make inclusion happen for anyone, but also for the LGBTQ plus conversation, we have to really trace back, and we have to have conversations with elders, and our position of demanding, as it should be, in the West, and as it's required. How does that apply here? And is that really efficient? Is that really making waves? So for me, I'm excited for what that means for me in the next 5 to 10 years, because I'm planning on staying here and making life work. But aside from that, I eat very well. You should know, Neil. I'm eating mangoes, pineapples, all the great stuff. So I'm fed, I'm feeling nourished, and I'm not going to take that for granted. So it's all good.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, I'm loving that hearing that you're so happy. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about how inclusion has to incorporate an element of decolonization and intergenerational learning and wisdom, and
Mm,
how that is something that is often overlooked in conversations around inclusion, and particularly with a queer lens.
yeah, yeah. It's a difficult one, because I came here, Neil, and I was like, right, I'm on, I'm visible, I'm doing my thing, I'm gonna come and I'm gonna tell my mom, I mean, my mom, she's always had, and I have to give credit to my mother, she's always been very suspicious, because she was looking at the work that I was doing, and she was like, okay, well, what's this LBTQ stuff that you're doing? And then she went on the website for We Create Space back then, and she was like, can I join that Who Am I thing? And I'm like, no, mom, you can't join the Who Am I thing. What are you going to talk about? She's like, okay, I just want to put it out there that if you marry a trans person, if you marry a non-binary person, she's like, see what I did there? Non-binary, I know what that is. I'm cool. If you marry, a lesbian, if you're a lesbian, I don't, just produce a child and I'll be happy. And I was like, well, I have an issue with that, but again, she has that level of awareness. So I thought it would be an opportunity, me coming back to delve into further education. And to my surprise, it didn't happen that way. Because one of the things that I was really adamant about, being here, is that I spent 10 plus years doing therapy as to the stuff that I learned internalized when I was younger, and my parents and what they did and what they didn't do, and all of what I want to show for myself. And when I got here, it became so clear that some of the expectations that I had was really unfair, and it just wouldn't work, because am a very well resourced person. Neil, I have someone like you I can call if I want to talk about, okay, sober living, or mental health or whatever. Who does my mom have to
Mm.
talk about, my child has come out as bisexual, or this, that, or the other, and is exploring identity? So I have to really understand that, as much as I want to educate, that's a me thing. But I need to meet my family where they're at. And in doing so, there's been so much that has, risen up. So many of the things, stories I didn't hear when I was in the UK for the last 20 years. So many of the things that took proximity for them to feel safe enough to tell me. And so this is what I'm still working through.
Yeah.
So it's a given to me to have that, again, level of privilege where I'm not in the pressure to go, find a job. I can, my family and my parents still have assets and land and things I can still, really benefit from. So I'm really taking that privilege, on board and saying, what do I do with this? Because
Yeah.
these people, if they're met in the right way, if we can start the conversation in a powerful way, well, they can become advocates for other queer folks because they can be like, oh, well, my daughter's, is bisexual. Well, this is what I know of it. And I'm finding, language and readjusting my own language to make that happen.
I love that. I love that you
Mm.
gently taking them along the journey, because everyone's journey around education and awareness has to start somewhere. It's something that I've learned along the way with perhaps people that are not where I'm at, or where I've kind
Mm.
of got to, and would definitely, whilst certain conversations and relationships came to an end as a result of certain things around inclusion, which I know we've spoken about before. I could have maybe handled some of those conversations a little bit differently, and I think that we overlook nuance, but we also sometimes overlook the fact that people get there that's maybe a different pace to us, or we need to be a little
Oh,
bit more
yeah.
compassionate and grace and show a bit more grace sometimes with those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it takes time to get to that
Yeah.
place, right? Because I think many of us at some point in our lives, we probably need to become, oh, I was a boundary bully. I was like, nope, 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 nope,
Okay.
nope, because I was trying to figure stuff out for myself. And now that I feel more open, and as I said to you, in this space, I defy so many expectations of what people imagine a bisexual person to be. When I show up with my kids and my partner,
Yeah.
they're like, but why do you need to call yourself bisexual if you already, you're like the picture perfect heterosexual, family couple? Why do you need to say that? And I'm like, that's exactly why I need to say it.
Yeah.
Because who else is gonna say it?
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm like, oh, this is where, I can use my platform to demystify the whole conversation and saying, well, there's nothing to feel crazy about or to, to feel appalled about. We're just people who are talking about, how we understand relationships, how we connect, the kind of love that we want to receive. And then we get into the detail if you want to know, but technically the details are none of your business.
Yeah.
So let's just keep it moving. And also, I think one of the key problems I'm really trying to tackle, as you know, with everything that's happening in Ghana, and in Nigeria and so many countries that criminalize LGBTQ plus identities. Well, we have people who are leaving.
Mm.
They're having to run away, literally to having to become refugees and to leave their whole sense of, their culture behind. They're having to leave their safety, or well, to a certain extent, what they define as safety, whether it's the cultural safety or connection, but they're having to leave a lot behind to start over in other lands where we know, as you know, as speakers, it's not easy to integrate, the West as African, West African person, a queer person. There's racism that you will meet
Yeah.
over there. So I'm just saying to my folks, like, aren't you tired of seeing your children go? Aren't you tired of delegating or brushing away your problems to someone else? Because they're not necessarily going to find an easier life there. So,
Yeah.
what can we do to stop having these amazing, talented people, these amazing, joyful, powerful individuals in development leave our lands to go somewhere else? What do we do about that? Because, we're always saying we're seeing people, crossing, the channel and dying, in the seas to make it to the UK, to Spain. But we need to take accountability for some of that, right? Because the UK's just passed a bill, the Rwanda bill. Like, what is that about? So what do we do about it? Stop saying the UK is doing something bad, or Western people are
Yes.
trying to
Okay.
change our kids and corrupt them. But I think there's a point to be said about, these are our children, these are our family members, our siblings, and we owe it to ourselves to find a way to include them in that conversation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And include them in the communities, the culture,
Yes.
and find space, because things progress and change. Wow, Maylis, there's we could have a whole conversation spending all day talking about this, but for now, I'm really excited to dive into your origin story. See, I knew
Yes.
I knew I was going to treasure this time with you. But for now, Maylis, are you ready to hit pause and rewind?
Oh, yes, please. Let's go.
Let's do this. Take me back. Tell me all about little Maylis.
Oh, you know what? I've got a picture of me like on my wall, in my on my desk, and I just look at myself every time, and it's like if I describe it to you, I'll send you a picture, Neil, at some point. But it's like I'm wearing like traditional garments and like a little crown with gold, and apparently it was a picture that was taken in like I think preschool or something. But there was a day we had to come as like our tribal, just dressed in our own tribe and ancestry. And my family members, I mean, both sides. Well, my mom's side, they're Akan, so they're like same in Ghana, and we have a particular type of cloth, and it's all very regal and beautiful. And every time I look at her, I'm like, who are you, you little magnet? You know, who are you, you little shady one? And I was very like looking at the camera, so very confident from an early age, very nosy, nosy, confident, and I think well-rounded in the sense that I grew up here with my entire family around me. You know, I grew up with a mom and a dad. I grew up with aunties. I grew up with cousins. I grew up knowing the village that I'm here now. You know, in this house, I came here when I was like 5 years old, and I remember there were hippos, you know, in the lake near here. So I've got so many memories as a child of loving nature and really cherishing the fact that I was here. You know, my grandfather was someone I loved very much and taught me everything about critical thinking from a very young age, you know, reading newspapers and saying, you know, what do you understand here? What is this person trying to say? So analyzing adults. And because I had so many people around me and I was so nosy and curious, I wanted like a fast track to adulthood because it seemed more fun, right? Because as a young person or like specifically like a child, growing up here, I was confronted very quickly with religion, right?
Mm.
And the power and the weight of it. And if it's not guided in the right way, what it can do to a child. So, and I'll give you an example, Neil. I woke up. No, I didn't wake up, but I was actually left-handed, you know, when I was a child. And I remember going to school, and it was a nunnery, like basically it was like a nunnery, but the nuns were running the school, and they were mean as hell. And they one day when we're doing nap time, they put like some chili powder on my left hand because you know when you're like a little tiny baby, like you wake up and you kind of like
Yeah.
brush your eyes a little bit to make sure you're awake. So they put chili powder on my hand so I could kind of, you know, when I would wake up and brush my eyes, it would burn so that I would know that being left-handed is something of the devil and being right-handed
Wow.
is where I needed to be. So I faced that and I told my parents, but no one was advocating for me. People were like, okay, well, if that's what they're saying is good, then let that be good. So I was feeling some kind of way about it and thinking, so already you're telling me there's aspects of me that are wrong. So something that I did not control is not right. Because God said so. So I was already thinking about who is God? Why does he hate me already? What have I
Yeah.
done to this person? And then there was the aspect again about my, I think, sexual orientation, but I don't even want to call it that because I think I was too young to think
Because
about
we
sex.
don't know. It's not. No,
No,
we know that we're different, right? There's something we don't have the language or the terminology for it, but we know. I know that I knew that there
yeah,
wasn't something that I felt very different. Jeffrey Weeks, academic, says knew he was queer without having the gender or the sexuality attached to it.
boom.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I feel, how I felt, you know, back in those days. Because I look at, you know, boys, girls. I mean, I didn't even think about the gender aspect of it either. It was
Mm.
like I just wanted to be around the people I wanted to be around,
Yeah.
and I just felt a sense of, you know, like the tingling feelings, you know, when I was with someone who I cared about. And if it was a girl, then I was like, oh my God, I really like this person. You know, why do I feel like so kind of uneasy and just kind of a bit giddy and nervous when I'm around this person? Same for, you know, boys. And I just wanted to explore that a bit further, but it was very clear to me also that, you know, aspects of femininity, for example, my mom never cut my hair when I, you know, so since the day I was born up until when my male nanny took me to get my hair shaved, because, you know, he was kind of drunk and didn't know what was going on. But effectively, I happened to shave my hair at that point. But by the time I entered school, girls had to have their hair shaved, because there was this idea that if we were to portray any form of just any, what do you want, how features that would appeal to desire, and that would show off a level of difference, or that would show off or even hint at some form of sexuality, we had to get rid of that. No makeup, no hair, very long skirts, very awful outfits, and just any way of taking off any aspect of individuality. So I struggled with that, because I looked at my passport picture when I was like 9, and I looked like a little, androgynous kind of human being. When I used to travel and we went to France, people were like, "Are you a boy or girl?" And I was like, "Does it matter?" in my mind? But it was always, growing up with that feeling of, if I take all of this off, like, who am I? But is my spirit welcomed? We're always focusing on the features that I have and how I present, but is my spirit welcomed? Is what I have to say valid? Is what I'm seeing important? Does my reality matter? So that was a beautiful part. It was a difficult part, but it was also a very beautiful part, because it made me even more curious, to go and meet people who were different from me. So we had comfortable living, and up to a certain point where we can get to that, we went from comfortable living to being propelled into very visible, prominent space, because my dad at 39 became minister in my country of like economy. So we went from having like a normal, cute little home, just doing the day-to-day roller skating, running around, bare feet, in the neighborhood, to barricades, guns around the house, military
Oh,
personnel,
wow.
protocol. You're not allowed to go out anymore. If we're going to school, you're in like an armored car. And so I've lived, and part of my story is living a lot of these kind of transitions. And I
Yeah.
think it really taught me to be so agile. And my dad said the most important thing to me is saying, what you have, don't hang yourself or attach yourself too much on things, because it could change. And
Okay.
that, from that point he told me that, I realized, because it happened, in many occurrences, and I realized that, oh, I'm just meant to go up and down and move through things rather than being stuck in spaces.
That must have, that natural inbuilt curiosity and
Mm,
maybe willingness to maybe challenge and question. Um, Definitely I see that now in the Maylis that I've I know. And probably what makes you so wonderful at digging out stories of other people is kind of being able to see those ups and downs and those ebbs and flows in people.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's what makes us.
Mm,
And one of the things I'm so grateful for this upbringing is that, having gone from comfortable living to experiencing, like, levels of wealth, and really high levels of wealth,
mm,
to going to that changing, when I
yeah,
was about 20, not 18, to that completely changing, to experiencing like really, really precarious living around like 21, and having no money, and, going to prison and coming out of that. It shapes you in a different way.
yeah,
Because not only did that make me really not take for granted the level of connection that you can have with people, and just trying to take away the material things and getting
yeah,
to know people for who they are, but it also made me realize that I have such a powerful opportunity to be even alive right now, to do what I do, because not many people would have that perspective of saying, you know what, if I'm here, great. If I'm not here, I'm not missing out on anything. And as a young person, it really drove my sense of, satisfaction, and learning to be satisfied with what I have. Don't be envious. Just learn, even though it's difficult.
yeah,
Learn to satisfy yourself with what you have, the people around you, and you can ask for more if you want to,
yeah.
but find joy in what you have.
That's amazing. And
Mm,
living those different lifestyle, living all those different lives. Like,
yeah.
let's take it back to Little Molis, and you've elaborated a little bit on
Yes.
your dad talking a bit about you and saying, hold on to who you are, and you have. And what are some of your favorite earliest memories, or perhaps your favorite anecdote that someone has told you about yourself?
To me, it's about just inclusion. And one of the greatest inspirations for inclusion. I mean, I don't know if it's inclusion or even just consideration and compassion, but my mom, we love dogs. We're like a dog family, like all the way. And we had this dog called Rocky, and Rocky was just like, Rocky would do what Rocky wanted. The minute you open the gate, Rocky was out. And Rocky sometimes would go and bite people for no damn reason. So my mom was like, oh my God, this dog is going to put me in trouble. And my mom went around the neighborhood and she vaccinated all the children in the
That's
neighborhood.
amazing.
She was like, just preparing, and giving you all a tetanus shot in case something happens. And so I was like, okay, this is a very interesting approach. But from the time where I was telling you I loved running around and running around barefoot, we have a very interesting structure in the way, you know, neighborhoods are made in this country. And way back in the days, I don't want to say like we were living in trees or something because we weren't, but you had neighborhoods that weren't quite developed yet and up and coming neighborhoods that were kind of becoming trendy. And the one that where I grew up was one of those. But just a little over the road, we had these kind of shacks. And we had like people who were, workers who basically weren't undeclared workers, who were just kind of hustling as they should, who were setting up their homes there and integrated in the neighborhood. And I had the little friend there who always had like, this kind of blown up belly and like snotty nose and everything. And that was my bestie. Like, Neil, that was my friend, like my pal. And my mom would come back from work, and the same person who would, vaccinate like the kids would be like, "What are you doing hanging out with this child? Like, don't you see you're different?" And I'm like, "But mom, what do you mean I'm different? Like, I like his house. His house is really comfortable." And she's like, "But you have everything in your house. Why do you need to go there?" And I'm like,
Mm.
"But like, his mom is nice, and he teaches me stuff. Like, he gives me sweeties and things like that." But I remember that feeling of always wanting to go towards people who didn't look like me. Like, I really wanted to know what it was like to live differently because I just wanted to learn. And I think for me, that level of perspective is so grounding because that saying of you never know what people have gone through, like why they make the decisions they make in the day. You don't know what their life story is. And I knew nothing about trauma back then, but for me, it was about don't, you know, don't discount people based on what they look like. And that friend, effectively, I told my mom, like, I'm not going to stop seeing my friend because of you. And, my mom eventually bought them a telly, like, and just said, okay, if
Right.
you're going to hang out in that house, let's just put a TV there so you can have something to do. And, that was it. So in a way, I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not budging. And effectively, I found another way of making life, I guess, more comfortable for me. But in essence, my mom found a way to make a connection with their family as well.
That is amazing. You sound like you had such a strong sense of self at such a young age. And but also beyond that, knowing that your presence and your time could make a difference.
Yeah, yeah. I think there is something to be said about the way we grow up in environments in certain spaces in West Africa because you're not so attached to your mother. Like I had nannies, but the nannies
Yeah.
weren't random nannies. They were like cousins and distant cousins and my mom's nieces and things. People were around us so much that I realized that some people would give me more space and others would just shut me down. So understanding authority figures, I'm sure you know this, Neil, when you sense an energy, you're like, oh, I don't think my behavior is going to fly with that person because they might just, slap me and tell me, oh, you're being rude as a child. But other people, they were more generous and giving. And I think having that ability to not just know my parents, but know a spectrum of, a
Yes.
range of people, it allowed me to test, my own approach and also receive feedback, right? As a young person saying, oh, you know what, you're very interesting, child. We're very curious, and each and different, every single person had something different to tell me. And that really built my character. And the fact that I was also very feisty, and my mom's a feisty person. So I know I'm taking that as well with me. But it was really a gift to think about, life and the world as being wider than
Yeah.
my two parents. And I think when I look at life in the UK with some parents, it's like, you don't have that.
No.
I look at my friends who grew up and who are also from West Africa and grew up just with their parents and, that lack of connection with their extended family. I think it shapes you differently. Not only the fact that you have to see yourself as different from the majority, but also, yeah, that ability to test and see
Yeah.
how people respond to you. It builds that sense of discernment,
Yeah.
and sensing energy. And I think this is what I always lead with. Does that, you know, does that align with my spirit? Do I feel good around this person? And I think exposure for me built that muscle.
A real testament to the way that different cultures and community makeups can shape someone. And particularly you touched on it there, but it's very different in the West. Families are a lot more devolved, a lot more disparate now.
Mm,
Um, and so having those people around off to bounce off, and the way it sounds like your community was set up and the life that you were living has really shaped you. Do you see little Maylis in your kids now?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how
Like
does that feel?
if it's just like it feels like I've been tricked, right? Neil, I swear. Because my dad was telling me, my dad's like, wait till you get your kids and you see what they do to you. And I'm like, Dad, don't say that. Like, am I that bad? He was like, you used to throw tantrums and drop on the floor and start crying and rolling around just because you wanted to, to have what you wanted to have. And my youngest, wow, like such a character. Like you cannot tell them no. Like you can't tell them no. Like you can't. Just don't tell me no, or you're gonna have it. And very, very generous, very kind, but also very determined based on, what he wants. And my eldest, it's like I called him like authority Solani, like and in French it's like autorité Soso, because he's just like it's like I'm just not giving into whatever you want to do. It's like you want me to do this, I want to do this. So you're the one who needs to do the bending and the adjusting because I'm not moving. And I
Wow.
look at them and I'm like, wow. So
Little.
how do I contribute, right, Neil, in the years that are coming to develop that in a so that it doesn't become this very kind of egotistic,
Yeah.
self-centered, because it can easily go left, right? And I've got, other family members in the same environment. We all grew up and we're all different. So, I know that it can shift. And I'm so grateful as well to have a partner who's very honest, very giving. And even in our representation of masculinity is someone that I'm so grateful for. Because for a long time, I never saw myself being in a relationship with an African man. Because in what I knew growing up, I was like, nah, we're not going to align because tradition, culture, this is how a movement needs to be. And I realized actually there are other people out there who are a bit different. So the kids are giving it to us. You need to come and stay here for a bit and you'll see.
I would love to. It sounds like little Maylis is biting you in the ass a little bit.
Yep, always.
Love it. Let's move on to your teenage years. For many of us, and you've already touched on about the fact that maybe recognizing that there was not an attraction, but an affinity with girls and boys for becoming a
Mm.
teenager. We do discover we have these realizations, changes in our bodies, and it sounds like you were able to kind of like assert who you were. But what was teenage made us a bit like?
Oof. Teenage Maylis was really disturbed, like challenged.
Mm,
I think teenage years for me were quite troubling because,
yeah.
and it's interesting when I see that shift. I left Cote d'Ivoire when I was 9 years old, and with that, and it's so important for me to frame this. Although I was aware that I was different with the people I was attracted to, I didn't have a framing for sexuality and queer. I mean, we knew about sex because of the church and what they were saying, and HIV, because Africa has a different history with HIV, and we were persecuted in just not being the kind of people that end up with HIV, being gays and this, that, and the other. So there was a lot of propaganda here. But again, that fear, I was aware of it, but I don't want to say that it traumatized me to the point of thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to explore these desires. But when I got to the UK, the first thing I said when we got to the airport, I was like, Mum, what language are they speaking? Like, what's going on? And she's like, they're speaking English. And so from that point, it shifted the level of self-discovery from who am I, what is emerging for me as a teenager, to I need to survive in this place, right? Because I went to school and my mom was super adamant that the first year we got there, we needed to be immersed in British culture and immersed in English. And I went to a school, and granted, again, there was a lot of privilege. I lived in St. John's Woods, right near like the Beatles studio, Abbey Road studio. So I wasn't, needing anything. So there wasn't, none of that in the background. But there was, again, still a disjointed kind of perspective of what this society expected of me. because my first day at school, with English kids, oh my God, I got bullied. I stayed in the toilet for like the first 3 days because there's something to be said about not understanding what people are telling you, but only feeling the energy and the animosity that's being thrown your way, because you know someone is swearing at you without understanding the words they're saying, because
Yeah.
it comes in their bodies. So that for me was really concerning. And I tried to tell my mom and my dad. They were like, okay, and we
Right.
just need you to learn English really quickly and
Yeah.
keep it moving. So there was no space to explore that. So at some point, my parents said, right, this English thing is not working, because we were raised and educated in French. It might be interesting for us to go to the French lycée in South Kensington. And so I transitioned, my brother first, but then eventually I transitioned there in my teenage years. And that was really difficult because, again, as I said, Neil, the resounding story for me was I'm in this space where I'm privileged. It's a private school in middle London with like celebrity kids. And yet I'm being, thrown the stupid questions about, oh, you African people, you live in countries, ha 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 ha, monkey this, monkey that. And I'm like, you have nothing, you know nothing about me. And yet, you're making this judgment. And something shifted one point where this group of kids, and I will never forget this, this group of kids came to me one day with their like mean girl, the leader of the pack. And she was like, so I Googled your name. And I'm like, okay. And she was like, well, your dad was a minister, right? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, cool, you can hang with us. I'm like, no, no, thank you. No, I don't want that. So I was already feeling that pressure of I didn't want to be part of that. And then my body was changing, going, as I said to you, from that schooling of androgynous looking, we're not having any hair, we're not exhibiting any, we're not amplifying, any of our features, we're not showing our bodies, to who am I in this space? So I was very tomboy, from that, early on in my teenage years. And then effectively I started to realize that my safe place was fashion,
Yep.
and I just loved textiles. And it's to be said, of course, West African people love colors and textiles and fashion. And I was like, I need to find a little world where, I can start exploring that. And then effectively I started to buy clothing because my dad never said no. And I just started to present myself in a different way. But as that happened, I can say acceptance came, but it was very transactional, from the space of, oh, you look great, you're wearing designer clothes, you can hang with us, or you're one of the cool kids, or, there we can gain something from hanging around with someone like you. On top of being Black, which meant that I was cool, and on top of being really precocious, because I went out clubbing when I was 11 the first time
Oh,
in Cote
wow.
d'Ivoire with my yeah, with my cousins. So you can imagine like an 11-year-old in a nightclub with people like smooching and dancing and like, almost like dirty whining, like, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Yeah, I was literally curious. Maylis was like, wow, this is what it means to be an adult. It's so much fun. So I was already, aware of the fact that I could find freedom outside of my home. And so when I hit that age where I was presenting a certain way, I was seen to be cool, my first thing was I need to run. I need to escape. So I was
Okay.
running away a lot. I was partying a lot. I was introduced to, I mean, drinking was happening around me for a very young, like my dad, he's in the Marines, and, we knew he had a bit of a problem, earlier on. But when his career changed path, he sobered up. But we were we had a lot of receptions and entertaining people at our house. So drink was just there. And so I used to hide in our little, we had like this little place where we used to hide the drinks. And I would just talk to the bottles and be like, oh, you're interesting. And I would taste. So I think I navigated that loneliness and that confusion and filled it with substances, right? So by 14, I was already clubbing. I was like a door be at some, popular club. I was letting my friends from school come in. And I think I derived that sense of value from being seen on the outside, but also knowing that I would meet strangers and it would only perceive me for what I showed and presented that day. So to your point, I think it was my teenage years was where I learned to distance myself and almost dissociate from the reality that I was living at home, the confusion about, okay, where is that journey taking me? I'm trying to understand who I am, but what is this current fight? And I was like, I'm done fighting. I'm just going to be what the world wants me to be. And I'm going to, take as much as I can from this presentation until, I have nothing else to do. So it was very lonely.
Mm,
And because I had no one else to talk to
yeah.
about this, it meant that I was very much in my head. So thinking, as you know, depression, anxiety that was undiagnosed, not wanting to be at school, not wanting to be seen, having rashes come up on my body. And then effectively for me, when I discovered and I started having sex, that was just, the perfect escape, right? And being precautious, it just took a life of its own. And looking back now, I'm like, wow, that was a lot of freedom given to a child.
Yeah.
And I am grateful to a certain extent because it allowed me to really crash and burn much younger. But would I do that to my kids? No.
Yeah.
And it showed that with children and young people who are in that phase of discovery and self-discovery, we need community and we need guidance more
Yeah.
than ever. And not to say my parents were completely responsible, but they had their issues, and issues of their own
Yeah.
happening, in the background as well.
I suppose they were navigating something that was completely out of context, as in moving away and in England. I've got two questions. How much do you
Tell
feel
me.
is connected to that lack of feeling of belonging? And so
Mm.
there wasn't a feeling of belonging, so you went completely the other way, and as you said, dissociated, disconnected. And then I'm just really curious to hear kind of like, have you had any conversations with your parents following that? Has that been part of your healing and moving forward? You said you crashed and burned at a young age. So just yeah,
Yeah.
curious about the belonging and then the follow-up conversations since.
Oh my God, the belonging one, Neil, it was really difficult because, as you said, the background is my mom. She was a professional woman. Like, she was a very like high level executive, like C-suite. Here she was earning like so much money. And at some point, my dad said to her, "Well, either you leave your job and you come with me to London, or I'm taking the kids."
Yeah,
And she was like, "What?" So she left her job. So she
right.
had a lot of resentment. She never wanted to be a stay-at-home mom or wife. And so we were feeling the brunt of that. But in a sense, she wasn't really interested about belonging because she was also trying to survive. And so I think if I look at it, what it showed me around belonging is sometimes people don't have the capacity, or maybe it comes with privilege, but when you're dealing with people who had to learn your language or to have to learn to speak like you have to understand that they're coming from a different place, because I came from a place where I had to learn words from the dictionary. So words are really important to me. And I try not to be wishy-washy about, I use synonyms sometimes when I'm writing copy. I'm like, what's a synonym for this? Because I love words, but sometimes I think people take it for granted. And when we talk about belonging, what you say informs how people feel.
Mm,
And if you're saying something wishy-washy, well, people are going to go off and think, but isn't that what you said? But why am I not feeling this way? So I think that has raised a great point for me to be, again, even more curious about how we get to unpack this belonging. And, to your other question, the healing part, I've had a powerful conversation with my dad, and he's the one so far that I've been able to go to depth with, and explore really what happened there. That level of freedom that was given,
yeah,
the fact that I didn't feel protected, I didn't feel um, I don't want to say that I didn't feel loved, but I felt loved, but in a different way.
yeah,
I just didn't feel accepted wholly and
yeah,
entirely for who I was. And my dad said to me, "I'm so sorry I failed you." And his excuse was that maybe we could have had religion as a bigger, have religion have a bigger influence. Because even though my parents, we were raised religious, we never really went to church. Like, it was like, okay, baptism, communion, but my parents didn't go to church on Sunday. They told us, get out the house, go to church. But none of us really went. My brother and I, we used to roam around the neighborhood and then come back with a little booklet and be like, yeah, we went,
we went.
and we never went. So my dad was like, I failed you because we didn't, instill religion as a core part of your upbringing. And I felt like your values were wishy-washy, and maybe the money kind of, blurred your mind. And I said to my dad, like, thank you, because a lot of what I was doing, the running away, the sex, the promiscuity, the drinking, the drugging, it was a way of me really crying out for help. And
Mm,
I wanted someone to say, "Hey, what's going on?" rather than saying you're not doing
yeah,
enough. And
Yeah.
part of the thing, one thing I didn't mention, Neil, is that West African education and education as a whole, in my country, it played a huge part. Like my dad was one of the best students of his generation, and his name gets like still to this day gets brought up as like one of the most stellar students in the country. So when you have a legacy of that, we were told the only way you should exist and what you should only think about is school and studying. And so when you leave that, curriculum and structure of, private tutors after school to go into the UK where we're basically like left to our own devices, that also shifted something in me and thinking, but what's ambition anyway? Maybe my ambition is to be seen and to be, this thing. And all of that, came to a halt when at some point, and we'll probably get into that, but I got arrested. I went to, to prison because of my drug and drinking. And when you kind of arrive at that place, it's like you really question everything you were taught. And as my therapist said, I had to learn to let go of what belonged to me and what didn't. I had to think about what was powerful for my culture and what worked for others, but what in my culture I was choosing to keep, right? And so all of that reflection, I'm still digging through as I'm still here as a grown adult, a parent, and thinking about how I can create safety for my mom, for us to have that conversation. Because my dad went through a deep period of transformation. And in that transformation, I saw that he was very vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, he used that to open up. And that's where I was like, you know what? I can work with that. But with my mom, it's a different journey. And,
Mm.
other family members, it's a different journey. So I'm taking that and really keeping that in my prayers and, again, prayers in my meditations and how, I elevate some of my thoughts. And I'm still hopeful that it could happen
Yeah.
because I still have a lot to learn.
It's a journey. It's a journey. And I imagine it's very much shaping your own experience of parenting as well.
Huge, 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 huge. Compassion and space for discovery that
Yes.
it
Yeah.
makes us
Space.
uncomfortable, but we have to go through it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Space to discover, space to fail, space to thrive
Yes.
and learn. Maylis, you talked about crashing and burning early, and we've had
Mm.
conversations around kind of sobriety and your prison experience. So what does happen next, if you're happy to share?
Wow. What happens next, Neil, is that I'm, thinking about if we fast forward to, like I think it's A levels, but in French we did like the baccalaureate. So in that space of time of being in the UK, we went to France for a bit. So we lived in Normandy for a bit for like 2 years. And that's where my parents' marriage was really at a very critical level. So there was that in the background. And the fact that I left my friends from London and I had to go to France and it was different kind of reality there as well as a Black person, but also as a person who's living in the UK, speaks English. So many, levels of difference happening. And so when we came back, I stayed another 2 years past my baccalaureate, and I was looking around at other friends and how their parents were preparing them for the future. And in that background for me, there was no one. My parents were doing that. They were splitting. And I had no one, think about orientation, like, where are you going to go to school, to university, like, what's that looking like? They just said to me, you'd have to find a university and just keep it moving.
Right.
And so I applied for the same university my brother went to, which was, this LSB BF and like to do international business and finance because my dad worked in commodities and he was like, you need to do this so I can find you a job in this. And I was like, oh, I'm dying on the inside. This is so rigid. And so I did that for a year. And then I just didn't want to anymore. First of all, because the school I went to was quite advanced, and my first year felt like I was being thrown 2 years back. And also, I realized that mentally I was not well. I couldn't focus in class. I didn't want to. I was partying every other night. I was drinking by myself. My parents also were splitting, and on the back of the split, my dad's position was shifting because the government also was shifting. There was a war in my country, and the people who were in power he was working with, and now that they weren't in power, he was having his job taken away, and he was literally kicked out of his job. And we had to pack because we were in like I don't know how you call them, but it's like the kind of homes that you get given, when you're a worker of specific thing or in like a specific environment. So we had this home that wasn't ours and we knew we had to vacate. And my dad was like, remember what I told you about things come and go? This is the time. So we need to
Right.
prepare mentally to leave. And I was 18 years old, Neil. I was like first year in uni. My parents are divorcing. I have a drinking and a drugging problem. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. I don't like myself. My parents are going to leave, so I'm going to have some people. I'm going to have no one looking over me after me. I'm going to be alone. And what do I do with that? So this sparked a beautiful discovery of saying, right, I don't like school. I love fashion. I'm going to push and push and push for it. I pushed, and had a beautiful uncle who was queer, actually, and left Cote d'Ivoire because he couldn't be himself here. And he emigrated to France, and then he settled in the UK. And he said, I see something in you. Come and work with me. I'm leaving this job. I want to build a PR agency. I know you're 18 years old, but you've got something. Come and do it. And we did that together. But even then, I couldn't be honest with him. I
Right.
didn't come out to him, even though he knew, but I never came out to him at that time. And I was hiding a lot of this, the behavior. I had a double life, Neil. Basically, like the easier way to say it is, I was one person when I showed up at work, and I was lying about what I was doing, and, the people I was sleeping with, because I had so much shame. And I think all of the narratives that I learned growing up about God hating me, and I was like, if this God hated me from that moment I was writing with my left hand, what the hell is that God gonna say about me
Right.
being, this dispersed soul? So I thought, no one's going to love me. No one's going to understand where I'm coming from. So let's just keep going with it. And
Right.
3 years I stayed in that PR agency. We made so many powerful accomplishments. Like we built a successful menswear brand, like that was sold in like 80 countries. We sold like our first collection for like over 250K, like really hitting some, some milestones. I couldn't even believe I could find success in what I was loving. But one thing I would say, Neil, is at that point, achieving all of those things didn't mean anything, because the moment we hit that milestone, I was on the phone with my grandmother, and she said, I hear it's going well for you. You did it. You made it. And the first thought in my mind was, why do I want to kill myself?
Right.
And trigger warning for the people listening, and I'm sure you'll do that, Neil, in the, the intro. But that was the first thought. All of my friends looked at me as a 21-year-old and said, Maylis, you're fashion director. You look amazing. You have everything. You in 5 years' time, who do you want to be? And people were like, you can be the black this and the black that, because there was no black, women doing anything. So it was like the first black Anna Wintour or whatever. I was like, no. But I just kept thinking, I need to run away. People are projecting again on my future. And my whole life, people have done that, telling me who I'm going to become without asking me for my opinion first. And I remember thinking, I need to leave. I need to leave. I need to leave. And I left. And as I left, and this is a story I've shared before, but not with you, Neil. I left with a real consequence, is that the sexual, behavior, my promiscuity had got to a point where I could no longer hide. As
Okay.
much as I never felt stressed about loving who I loved, and having, relations with who I wanted to have relations with. I was doing it in a very insatiable way. And, sex addiction is part of my story. And so when you live in that way of never being satisfied, never being okay with silence, never being okay with, this is my body, what do I do with it? Can I just be? I felt pregnant, right? And I felt pregnant at 21, and I kept the pregnancy, or I deluded myself that I was not, even though I stopped having my period, and I was like, oh, this is happening. Ooh, shoot, my belly's, kind of growing, and I was trying to find ways to hide it. And when I left the PR agency, I was in Florence, and I contemplated killing myself. It's not even say contemplated. I tried to hang myself. That's the reality. I actually stepped on, and I tried to go for it, because I didn't know that now. Not only did I, arrive at this point where I messed up my whole life, I lied to the people who believed in me. This uncle that I had was always telling me, Maylis, why are you going out with these people? Why are you not taking care of yourself? Please tell me how I can help. And I was crying, Neil, but I couldn't get the words out of my mouth to say, I'm broken,
Yeah. Help
right?
me.
So
Help
I
me.
just said, I need to end it.
Mm.
And as I tried, my grandfather's voice came into my mind, and it was like, girl, is it that serious? And I sat down, I was like, actually, maybe it's not, because I just don't like myself. But what can I do to actually like myself? And I started writing and writing. I said, okay, right, I'm gonna go to New York. That didn't happen because my druggy self went in on a bender. I'd had a job opportunity there. I was gonna go and make it and live the American dream. And I missed my flight. And I found myself in some really awful and really awful situation. And I started to dissociate now, really cognitively, mentally, and I didn't know what I was doing. And that's what led to me getting arrested, because I was airing when I came back from Florence to London, I was just airing in the street. I was literally homeless, but I don't know to this day, Nia, I can't tell you how I survived it. I just know that I'm here, right? I always found a place to stay because I was always very sociable and had people would say, come hang with me. But to this point, I don't know how I did that. And there came a point where this cab driver who was basically trying to help me, I blacked out and I attacked him. And that was when reality, sat with me. I was like, wow, I just hurt someone. Was that right? Was that person trying to attack me? But why did I feel threatened? But ultimately, the rage that I carried, Neil, the rage of not being heard, the rage of never being asked for my opinion, of being told what to do, of really being told that almost I had to be perfect.
Yeah.
That rage of wanting to be freed from that, I hurt someone else because of that. Rage was never expressed and was mismanaged and mishandled. So my whole life really changed when I, got to Holloway Prison, which doesn't exist anymore because it got sold to I don't know who to make a bunch of flats. But that was a pivotal moment for me, Neil, because the moment I arrived there, they tell you to pee in a cup. Just to see like the levels of drugs you have in your system because they knew I was out of it. So they were like, okay, we need to figure out where we're going to put you. Is your thing, heroin is your thing, cocaine, what's your deal? So we know where to place you.
Yeah.
And this Nigerian nurse said to me, okay, but what are we going to do about the baby in your body, in your belly? And I'm like, she knows. What do I do? And from that point, and I'm open about this, I've had an abortion in prison, which is a traumatizing experience. But in that same vein, I also got to reconcile and make peace with religion because the women who held me down, the women who supported me, the African aunties who showed up for me, they were praying every single day. But they said to me, don't worry, you're going to leave. You're not meant to stay here. Your day will come. You will leave. So I found a different kind of level of support from strangers. And it made me believe again in people because maybe the people I knew weren't all their way together because they had their stuff going on. But it made me believe that if you're honest from the get-go and if you're really, really vulnerable and you ask for help, people will give you help. People will help you. And so when I left there, not only did I do 6 months, but those 6 months, Mia, were the break I needed. I never knew I needed. And as much as I was stressed out about leaving fashion and seeing all my friends, progressing in their career and making it happen, it saved my life to pause. Literally, we're on pause and rewind. That big pause transformed my life.
That was a
because it
turning
made me
point.
gain. It was. I got an awareness about what drug addiction was because there was this beautiful woman who came to my little hatch and was like, hey, did you have an issue with drugs? I'm like, who's asking? So she's like, we run NA and meetings and things. You should come. And I went reluctantly, and I discovered Mandy, who's an amazing mentor of mine, who took me in when I left prison because she had a recovery home, and it just took on from there. I started trusting, and I started asking, and even with the abortion, I got a beautiful human being called Celia Wyatt, who said to me, "Uh-oh, I know you want to go and abort this child, but I need you to sit down because the last thing I want you to do is have an abortion and not know what it's rooted in." And she asked me the question, do you feel worthy to be a parent? Is a part of you feeling so much shame that you think you would ruin this child? Like questions I would never even think to ask myself, Neil. But the reality is, shame will get you to a point of thinking, I don't deserve to live. I don't deserve to be a mother. I don't deserve to be loved. I don't deserve to be this. And she pulls me down to write that stuff and said, if you go and do this, I need you to be clear with the reason why. And I need you to learn to be okay with it. And I think that's what most women and most people who experience pregnancy, whether they are not able to carry it through term or whether they're grieving or even have to face abortion, we have to accompany people in that journey of understanding that it's okay to say no, not right now, or no, never. Right. And I had people who did that for me. And to this point, when I had my first child, in reality, full circle moment, Neil, full circle moment where I was like, wow, I'm here.
Yeah.
I did it and I'm okay. And I love me for doing that, you know?
Looking back now,
Mm,
obviously people listening to you, having that
mm.
space, having people listening to you. Looking back now, have you been able to process? Is it still an ongoing process? Thank you for sharing as well. Like,
Yeah.
taking a moment to reflect, and I just want to say how grateful I am for you for trusting me for sharing all that. Looking back now, have you been able to forgive yourself, move
Hmm.
past it, use it to recognize I just needed people to listen.
I have, Neil. And the reason why I'm even able to speak about this is because, now, and this is what therapy does or any form of counseling and support looks like, even with community support,
Mm.
space to talk. It kind of gives you that distance
Yep.
it allows you to process the emotion that are arising, but it creates a distance. The more you talk about it, you distance yourself with the story and you're able to observe it. And I think for me, in observing who I was like, oh, wow, really needed people to hug you. Like you needed more
Yeah.
hugs. And I was not a hugger back then. I was like, don't touch me. But I realized that, I needed that. And in learning about sex addiction, for example, you know, one of my mentors said to me, we're finding that a lot of young children who didn't experience, gentle touch and comforting and, physical kind of connection, that plays an impact in the fact that you
Yep.
dissociate yourself and you disconnect your body from what you're feeling, and you're able to just be like, whatever, you objectify yourself, and for me, I had to bring in compassion a whole point, Neil, because recovery in itself is a hard journey. As I speak to you today and to the people listening, don't ever take for granted the people who are telling you they're trying to change a specific behavior, be it,
Yeah.
food issues, drugs, alcohol, even when it comes to relationships, some people who are, um, having codependency issues, like it's not easy to shift those
Yeah.
foundational wirings. And for me, it made me listen more, and it made me find the courage to say, huh, if I don't speak up, no one's going to do it for me. That's the harsh part.
Yeah.
You can have all the learnings, you can do all of the therapy work, and some people thrive without having to go out and put it in the world. But for me, I really wanted to make space for that. Even with
Yeah.
We Create Space and the spaces I created in the past, it was important to bring that intersection of
Yeah.
addiction, with queer identity, because
Yeah.
I was one of the only few female or women, in the sex addiction, meetings in Soho or in other spaces. And people were like, why are you here? Usually it's mostly gay men in this space. And I'm like you. I have an issue. I
Yeah.
objectify myself in some way. And that even learning was transformational for me to think, but why have I learned to view myself in that way?
Yeah.
And why am I commodifying myself and telling the world that it's okay for me to be seen as a commodity?
It sounds like you have absolutely lent into your own vulnerability and just literally put that all on the table and been like, this is the only thing that's going to help me right now.
Mm. When you've got nothing else to lose, Neil, like the reality is, and my first sponsor, Audrey, like she's so beautiful. She said this to me. She's like, listen, Maylis, you're 22 years old. Okay, right now you're the person, Mandy. I was living in that recovery house. She's saying, okay, she wants me to focus on my recovery for 2 years, and I was like intellectualizing recovery because yes, I'm so smart and I can think for myself and I can think about my emotions because I was always very self-aware, and so I could assimilate, knowledge. But I did that and lied to myself. So I even
Right.
failed at recovery for the first few years because I was
Okay.
lying. I was saying all the beautiful
Yeah.
things and I was not doing the work, Neil. I was
Right.
in that recovery home and I was running around with my friends, drinking, drugging, doing
Right.
everything. And it hit hard because I was like, to what extent are you going to be so misaligned? Because you're living one life with your friends and you're living another life in this home. What does authenticity mean to you?
Yeah.
And one day I broke down and I was caught. And one of my mentors said to me, "You see, you crying like this is the most powerful version of you I've seen in my life.
Right.
And I really want you to lean into that because you're the kind of people, because you're so great at doing stuff, people will easily put you on a pedestal. But the problem is when you get to that pedestal, you will find yourself so alone that it will force you to effectively either take your own life or again go back on the downfall. So you need to be able to calibrate that and remember that people will see your value, but the reality, as we always say to people, you have to know your value first. You
Right.
have to know what you're willing to concede and not concede. And it's the same thing with your body. It's the same thing with your story. It's the same thing with everything, Neil.
Yeah. I guess, you are smart. You are so intellectual. I've heard many conversations, that you've chaired on bodily autonomy
Mm,
and equality. And so it sounds like you just couldn't outsmart yourself anymore. And at some point that bullshit had to just come crashing down with
Neil,
with a whack.
this is it. Neil, this is it.
Mm.
Because I think this is the problem, my problem with the world. And again, when I say to people that I enter inclusion, people often think, oh my God, Maylis, you're doing such great things. You have to understand that there was a point in my life where I was a complete asshole. Like
Right.
there was a real point in my, I was lying every day. I was just kind of like putting barriers up. I didn't want to be seen because to a certain extent, there's a part of you that feels better than people. Because what tells you that you can't be honest enough to be seen like every other person who's struggling? Why can't you struggle?
Yeah.
Everyone else can struggle, but you can't. But are you not human? And I think I had to get to grips with that part of my humanity and say, I'm not different. And that was what prison taught me. I saw other Black women in that, in that space, but unlike me, they couldn't advocate for themselves. I found myself in front of a judge many, many a times where I was like, listen, this is it, this is who I am. This is what I need. And they were like, wow, you've got no pride. You speak so well. Again, as a Black person, you're one of those Black people who are so eloquent.
Yeah.
Tick, 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 bonus points. But what's the difference between me and that other person who keeps entering the revolving door? Trauma, we know inequality, mental health. So I had to think about this part. We're both different, but we all entered the same space. So I'm not different than you.
Yeah.
Different circumstances, but ultimately the pain is still the same. So, Neil, to your point, you can outsmart yourself. You can,
Yeah.
intellectualize the content. You can intellectualize therapy. You can intellectualize well-being, even inclusion. You can say all the right things, but it will catch you. If you're
Absolutely.
not doing
Yeah.
the work, it will show in time. And it's always been the case. Every workplace I've been, the people who were saying one thing on the outside and behaving differently on the inside, either those businesses closed, certain leaders had powerful transformation
Yeah.
and got them to go back and start again. But we have to get real. And society, I think, is struggling to find the words to get real. We want to say the right things and the
Yeah.
McKinsey type of, you know, the beautiful words that would make HR Sally, say, yay, we're doing the right thing. But in the spaces that we hold, we have to get real with people.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're setting them up to fail.
Well, people see through it now. People see through it now. And I don't have an addiction or recovery story, but I am sober.
Mm,
And with myself, and this is probably down to semantics. I often say I didn't have a drinking problem, but my behavior was problematic,
yeah,
right? And it's semantics, and I don't identify as an addict, but I had to be really, really real with myself when I decided to move past just not drinking and taking drugs as a challenge through to actually this is a lifestyle that I now want to do. And more
yeah.
recently, as I've hit 5 years, is actually really look at my behavior and say, do you know what? Like, I don't know if I was necessarily doing that to escape something, but my God, I a bit like you, could be an absolute arsehole, and I wasn't showing up for myself. I certainly was
Mm,
letting other people down left, right, and center, and actually
yeah.
having to do the work and having to do the meaningful work as well and stop bullshitting myself.
And that's huge. Neil, you know why I love your approach? Because you went to find what works for you. And as I speak here today, I've been through the classic recovery, AA, NA, CA, all that. I'm not part of that anymore, right? I don't, I drink when I feel like it, but drinking and alcohol is not something I think about. Like if I go shopping, it's like, it's not a must.
Mm.
Same with drugs. I don't feel the need to have that in my life because it just has no space. And what I wish for people who are struggling is, by all means, find a way to get into it and separate
Mm.
yourself from that behavior, because that's the best thing you can do. In that space of separation, your emotions will rise up. Now, what do you do with that is, for me, where the work begins. Will you look at the trauma, or will you brush it away? Will you look into it and actually start building resources to shape what you need, right? Because I did abstinence from sex for like 4 years, in different times, different batches, drugs the same. And all I got was space.
Yep.
All I got was space. And I chose to work in that space. And what I discovered is what led me to here. And this is the same to you. It's important to know, phrases like once an addict, always an addict. I don't buy by that,
No,
because I think it's
same.
not true. Right. And I think everyone is capable of transformation, but you have to find a way that works for you.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's beautiful. Thank you. Maylis, how much of all this do you think has led to your destination in inclusion?
Everything, all of it,
Everything.
all of it, Neil. Because as I was saying to you, first entry point role in fashion, I was, Alexis and I were both Black, and we were the only two Black people doing fashion PR in London. So I can only let you imagine, what that meant when people, from like ID magazine or whatever, they were like, oh yeah, we're coming to the press day, and then we're opening the door and we're smiling like, and they're like, where's the boss? And I'm like,
Me.
you're looking at her.
Yeah.
And all those instances where we had people bet against us, we had people tell us, you're not, great that you're doing this, you're doing great stuff, but you're not, it's never going to be good enough to be recognized. So I think I was always able to weave in, my experiences of disconnection, disillusionment, exclusion in some context, but also the privilege that I had, and think about, but how do we make life easier for people at work? Because I know what it's like when you're not at ease and you have that sense of dis-ease in the workplace. And being a Black woman, a Black queer woman with mental health, living with mental health and living with addiction and depression and anxiety, it was fascinating to draw those lessons and think, wow, if I'm saying this, and I've said it in many rooms and people have resonated. So I'm
Yeah.
like, but if we all know this, why are we not talking about it? So Neil, this is really that foundational, those key learnings that brought me to say, well, we need to talk more about it. And when I realized that we needed to talk more about it, I was like, but if I'm a Black person saying this, where do Black people go and get help? And I realized that even the healthcare industry was predominantly like super white. But eventually, when I did more research, I realized there were a lot of Black therapists, and Black and Asian therapists were doing their own thing. But I realized that it falls on us to unravel those resources and say to people and signpost and say, this is what I did.
Yeah.
And this is why we need to be visible. This is why we need to talk about these things. And those of us who sometimes live with survivor's guilt, but are still waking up every day, I think it's a gift to be able to speak like this without being in the emotional aspect of it, being deep in the emotion. Because the spaces that we've been to sometimes, Neil,
Mhm.
how emotions come up for people.
Yeah.
And I think the rewarding aspect is knowing that the work that you did serves exactly this purpose. So you
Yeah.
can be now the one holding space for others to be real and to find their own resources. And for me, that was the key of staying. And I think this is what still encourages me to stay in inclusion, because I think as we're talking about this story, I've told it like 5 years ago, but even as I say it now, I'm still thinking, wow, this
Yeah.
is still important for me to keep talking about this.
Absolutely. There's an accountability about it as well, isn't there?
Mm-hmm,
For yourself
mm-hmm,
and for how you show up for others. Um, Life now, Maylis, we've kind of
mm-hmm.
with life now. Would you imagine that life now would be what it is based on what we've just been talking about?
No, no, no. My idea of success was when I was like 15. I was like, oh, if I could just have like a lot of money, if I could just
Yeah.
have like lots of money. By the time I'm 30, like if I have lots of money, I would put money in a trust fund for my brother, for my mom, for my dad, and I would just run on an island and just be alone. Like that's how I imagined, being. Because I didn't imagine, and at the core of it, Neil, I could not imagine people wanting to be around me because I hated myself. So I never thought that someone would want to, spend their life with me, let alone even having, a family. So it was never possible. Even as I celebrating my 3 years back home, even the journey back, I could have never imagined doing it, in this way. So it's a transformational shift, like a huge shift. And I'm just so grateful for it. And I know there's more. So I'm like, wow, if this
Yes.
is what I'm doing at this age, what's next?
What a transformation, Maylis.
Mm,
Thank you so much for sharing. I'd love to hear about someone who shaped you along the way. It sounds like there's quite a few people popping up, and who's a
yeah.
person that perhaps has shaped you the most?
Like one person I'll lean back on, and this is a beautiful question. Thank you so much, Neil, because Alexis, as I told you about, was my first like Ivorian, like fairy godmother, just someone who said, "You're amazing. Like, do you not see your talent?" And even till this day, I don't think it's still sitting with me because I'm working through that, as we all are, to really grasp the power of who we are. But that was the first person who said to me, "You need to take care of yourself."
Yeah,
And I was a spoiled child, and it was the first person who said, actually, and I'm not ashamed to say it, the first person who taught me how to wash my own clothes because I didn't know how to do that.
right.
And was like, I'm going to be, if your parents missed that part, I'm going to be the person guiding you through that. So I'm forever grateful for that. And one of the key people comes to mind, my mom, obviously, but my grandmother, who is, towards her end of life at the moment. And I'm living in her legacy right now, and one of the things that she's given me, and this is in the context of inclusion, is in the 20 years I've lived in London, the 10 plus years that I've been working, something's always happened to me when I feel or I have experienced, workplace trauma, that sense of not only not belonging in the workplace, because that's what, that's where the trauma kind of manifests and shapes itself, but the aftermath of it, Neil, where I just felt so lost in thinking, what am I going to do? And downgrading myself and saying, oh, maybe I shouldn't aim that high. Maybe I should just, change something about myself to make this life work better for me. And going through this transition, for example, now with We Create Space, as I told you, like changing work, becoming a parent here, major life moments that I've had here, and being able to walk on the lands that my grandparents and my ancestors walked on, being able to go in the forest, and they have acres and acres of land, and again, it comes with the privilege, but I'm not going to say that I'm mad at it, because I'm like,
Yeah,
this is a feeling I've never had before, right?
right.
And my partner always says to me, sometimes people take for granted when you're at home, you're in your native home, in your native land, in your native country, you can bounce off of things much easier because the system is more lenient towards you. You have more affinity, you have more support. But
Mm.
when you're out of that bubble, it feels just like you're spinning. And I've been able to take hits in a different way, Neil, because as I said to you, I'm eating well. I've got foods that I've eaten, in my childhood. So my recovery from the hits, it's not the same as as experienced it in the
Yeah.
UK. So I'm just so grateful for this woman who back in the day was a revolutionary woman, doing business and doing so many things. And I'm taking away, that away from her, and watching her die and watching her live, the with grace, like leave that legacy, and seeing her children around her. I'm like, wow, if I have even that, just 10% of that, wow, at 90 plus plus, because no one knows her real age because she won't tell us.
Really?
But oh yeah, I'm sure she's 100 something. But seeing someone live a good life
Yeah.
and a valuable life and having an impact, even just in her little corner of the world, that's what I want for myself, and that's what I want for my kids. So I'm just, yeah, I'm just really happy I did that.
And I'm sure she's so happy to have you there at this time and
Yeah,
have her little Maylis with her.
yeah, we just always have a laugh. And she's just, yeah, she's just exceptional.
Thank you so much. And Alexis, Alexis, what words do you have to say to Alexis? Like, because
Ah,
I really feel that like kind of like that wanting. I kind of wish someone had at some point said to me there could have been
mm,
a different way, right? With
yes.
my behaviors, and actually I might have told them to piss off at the time. know, because there were times maybe like you that I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't ready to hear it. I didn't have the
Yeah.
emotional capacity to hear it. What would you like to say to Alexis now? Like,
I mean, just expressing just more of my gratitude, like beyond. And I've said this to him, and I've apologized to him because I ran
okay,
away from the role that I had, and I said, you know what, you've given me so much, and I'm so sorry because I didn't have the words to tell you how hurt
yeah,
I was, and how difficult it was. And he said to me, you're like my daughter. I see you as my child, right? So why wouldn't I, embrace you? And I think for me and Alexis is someone who's living in Spain now, and has had such a difficult relationship with his own
mm,
home country and his native country. And I just want that freedom for him. And I not to say that he's not free, but I want even more of that. And I want his legacy to shine. And I want the world to benefit from so much from his teachings as much as I have. Because the gift of having elders in the queer community for me
yes,
was it prepared me to know what to do and what not to do, or at least to think about what I
yeah,
wanted, right? And I think for any young queer person growing up, if you have queer elders, my God, just hold on to them,
cherish
and,
them,
and
cherish
don't
them.
cherish them and don't let go. Yeah,
We do. We need to do that. The community needs to do better when it comes to our queer elders. Absolutely.
absolutely.
Maylis, I could carry on all day and we've got some more to go
Me
through, but what
too.
are you most proud of to date?
Wow. I think if I think of a recent thing, and it might sound I don't think it sounds silly. But the most recent thing is I told you about becoming a parent, and for me that journey of abortion, because I had two. I mean, in my life I've had three abortions, and I'm still working through those. But from going to that place of being someone who could not be a parent, who did not want to imagine was worthy of being a parent, to becoming a parent, and doing so in a very interesting context of I delivered two kids in 2022, so one in January, one in December, and believing in my body, Neil, and believing in my own capacity to thrive even when things were difficult. That's one of the things I'm most proud of, because I was reflecting on just my whole journey with We Create Space, and someone I want to shout out to is Denny too. Denny's like someone I love, and a mentor to me. And Denny was like, in those phases of transition when you're thinking about your next step, like think about your receipts, like all the things that you did, and wear them like jewelry, so, like just put them on you, just lavish yourself, and just go
Oh,
out in the world and be like, I'm that person. In
yeah,
2022, everything I did, Neil, in the backdrop of becoming a parent and having two deliveries, I'm like, who are you? And it's not to say that I would do it again,
yeah.
because health wise it's a challenging thing, but I'm so proud of the fact that I used the energy that I had left and poured it into the spaces where I was involved, and at the same time created the conditions to still be myself and to still face what I was facing, and to learn and discover a new Maylis, with the kids.
And still learning, still discovering. Maylis, you
Yes.
have opened up so much. I'm so grateful for you sharing your healing and your vulnerability and your story. What a story. And I'm sure there is so much more. But thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Are you ready for some quick fire questions?
Yes, quick fire, go.
What album, book, or movie has had a lasting impact on you?
Album. Okay, so I love music. And if I want to say an album that's had an impact, and I will, like, probably you could plug it, Neil, is the music that we put together, and the collection that we put together for We Create Space in the beginning during
Okay.
COVID. That playlist, I think it's still there. It really shaped a part of me. Like,
Great playlist.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
We
And
dance
African
we dance
music, I'm
we
a
dance
piano.
again is one of the ones that we I play all the time at the start
That
because it's such a tune. And
that song,
the Khalees song as well.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. We dance
Okay.
again. That song, beautiful. Love it.
Love that. Love that that playlist has such an impact on you. We get requests for that playlist. Yeah, love
Yeah.
it. What saying do you live by? And what saying do you want to put in the bin?
So live by is my dear alcoholic friend, uh Arthur, who said, you get what you get when you get it. and it took me a long time to understand what he was saying. But effectively, when it landed, I was like, okay, stop stressing about trying to understand everything in the moment.
Right.
Just keep walking, and then it will hit you on the head. And if you're not, if you're stubborn enough, maybe it's like something that might literally lift you off your feet. But the
Yes.
learning will happen in due time. So
You get
that
what
for
you
me is
get.
something I live by.
You
When
get
you
what
get
you
it,
get when you get it. Love.
simple. And the one I want to throw in the bin is fake it till you make it. Because my thing in life is if I enter any situation faking something, it's going to bite me in the bum. And I'm actually entering that space not being my whole authentic and fullest self. So, and my encouragement for people is can we encourage people to have confidence in the moment rather than telling them to get to a certain point and start unraveling?
Right.
Because that's been really true for me and something I've tried. When I hear people say that, I'm like, no, no, I'm not faking anything. And if you don't like it, tough. Thank
Fair.
you. That.
That I just stuck my fingers up for anyone
Yeah.
listening. What has been the best adventure of your life so far?
Wow. I think I have to say, like, starting really co-creating We Create Space during COVID. I think that was huge because at a time where I think the world was shutting down, being able to open a window for queer folks and be like, "Hey, you can hang here. We're gonna ask ourselves
Yes.
the biggest, deepest questions that we maybe haven't had the courage to ask ourselves and do it together."
Yep.
That for me was a moment, and really being there, as a co-founder, as someone who really poured everything I could have poured into it.
Yep.
To me, that was the greatest adventure of my life. And finding community as someone who never thought to put my queerness at the forefront, it made me think that, wow, this is everything I wanted and more.
I love that. And one of my go-to sayings is really, really resonates from the work that We Create Space we're doing. I've been working in inclusion for a while and with an event focused. But I often say, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that stems from a lot of the conversations that I've been a part of and listened to before I joined We Create Space. And so I credit We Create Space with a lot of my own ethos around that, but particularly
Mm,
community. I always say with
yeah.
my journey with We Create Space is, as an events manager, I came for the engaging content, but as a storyteller, I wanted in on the
Mm,
action, right? And I love here the
oh,
fact that what you have achieved, what We Create Space achieves is bringing out stories, lived experience, and the impact that that has. What three words would you use to describe your origin story? This is a good.
oh, it's I want to say dramatic because there's a lot of that in there. Um, I think pivotal, dramatic, pivotal, and I think there's a word that came to mind. It was graceful because if I think about, yeah, how I've been able to take on the hits, there's a certain level of grace that comes with it in being at the bottom and saying, wow, I was up here and now I'm down here. Now,
Yes.
what is the achievement? Where am I going? And that takes a level of grace. So yeah, drama always love it.
I love that you own that. Dramatic, pivotal, and graceful.
Yeah.
Love. Thank you. Let's fast forward a little bit. What
Mhm.
exciting things do you have coming up?
Exciting things coming up. So I've got a couple of trainings lined up in Paris, and inclusive leadership trainings. And I think why it's exciting is because I'm venturing into doing more in-person stuff, and where there's a lot of movement and where there's a lot of embodiment. Because I think
Okay.
one of the aspects of inclusion that sometimes we take away is the embodied learning. And we're talking about shifts, and it doesn't have to happen here. And even with terminology, I want people to start feeling into stuff. And I managed to do it the last time we were doing the training. And shout out to my co-creator Xavier on this program that we put together. But it's doing more of that, more of movement, more of people feeling, and defining, their boundaries. But as I said to you earlier when we were chatting, understanding how you create internal safety. And if I get to do that all year round, I've done my job. Yeah.
Well, I really see that. You really do create safe spaces.
And
Yeah.
shout out, sorry, to outspoken speakers, because as a newly unboarded
Yes.
board member, I'm really excited to also support and just see that community thrive, because more spaces for queer women and non-binary people, I think we can't advocate for that enough. But also the fact that outspoken is not just thinking about platforming people because they're queer, women, and non-binary. It's about bringing their talent, to that level and saying, how much enrichment they can bring to organizations by sharing their stories, but also curating programming for inclusion.
Fantastic. I was so excited when I saw that you'd joined as a board member. I'm a huge advocate for Polly and Ragga's work. They're both guests on the podcast, and so you come from.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
listened
I
to
have a
it. It's
feeling. I have a
amazing.
feeling I'm going to be seeing more outspoken speakers on the podcast as well. What brings you joy, Maylis?
Brings me joy is good food. Like I was telling you, so going to pick up mangoes, like I've been obsessing with mangoes for the last 2 years. And I was like,
Yeah,
to think I had to buy mangoes for like £2 for how many years? And today they just fall off that tree behind there.
I love that.
So enjoying good food, sleeping, now that the kids are like 2 and going on 3. Um, and yeah, my partner, I have a lot of gratitude for my partner and just being able to reimagine, what looks like. And I think
Yeah.
one thing I have to say, like in our communities, we're fighting for a lot of things. And like Dr. Paul, who I love, Paul Taylor Pitt, talks about how we need to also think about how queer people keep loving, and talk more about how we love,
Yes.
as opposed to defining how we love. Let's talk about how we love, and why we love so hard in such beautiful ways sometimes. So for me, it's about doing the good work, but keeping love alive in my life, because it's vital.
Do the good work and keep the love alive. That's so beautiful. What takeaways do you have listening for anyone wanting to carve out a career or create a space in inclusion?
I think to your point, Neil, around storytelling, right? We create space, and throughout this journey in my life as well, and we create space was a punctuating moment for that. It's about how your story propels you forward. How does that move you forward towards the change that you wanna see? And I always want to tell people it's important to take stock of how far you've come. Like we're talking about those jewels and the wins, because the inclusion space is hard at the moment, and we're seeing,
Mm.
the downfall. I don't want to say the downfall of DEI, but essentially, the negative messaging that's surrounding
Yeah,
it, and the fact that people are pulling away from
yeah,
imagining how a world can function with further, inclusion, and also more awareness on how we behave with one another. So I think find resources around you and find stories of change around you, and even get better at articulating your own theory of change, right? Because that's what people believe in. The
yeah.
formulas, the models, I think they're really important for systemic change. And when you get into the corporations, and if that's what you want to do, even within the systems, you have to think about how you navigate with the system, but understanding your own, entry point, how you're entering into areas where you have knowledge, but also areas where you know nothing about. And I think for me, it's so important, specifically around trans inclusion. We had to do a lot of learning. I had to do a lot of learning. And as change makers, we have to get aware, we have to get to grips with that we are just as much, on that
Yes.
journey of learning, than anyone else, all the participants in our audiences as well. So getting on that level of, I'm not an educator, I'm just like you. This is what has always worked for me, in the past, but it takes the learning and the awareness of knowing who I am to realize that I can just
Yeah.
give what I've got, but I'm taking it also. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, saying that, I'm here to learn as well, and not being afraid to change your mind when presented with new information. And actually there's a vulnerability in that in itself, and just like, I'm here to learn along with the rest of you. That's brilliant. Brilliant advice. Thank you. And then finally, do you have any words of wisdom or encouragement for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
Wow. Just don't give up. Just don't. Because you might get surprised. There's always a surprise waiting for you in the corner. And one thing I like to say about myself, and in every time of difficulty that I say to myself, is like, one thing I know about myself is I will struggle, but I always get there.
Yeah.
And I say that to people. It's like, it's not to tell you that, maybe I don't understand this right now, but I will get there. And so I think it's a point of having faith in yourself, and a way of framing, your own development and your own growth with people, who you have challenges with. So don't give up, and know that, find that anchoring of belief that, and my friend tells me, it's like, believe in your ability to do difficult things because you have done it in the past. And I think sometimes we get stuck. Believe in your ability to do difficult things as you have done in the past. So that's what I'm dropping here as a last word.
Maylis, thank you so much for sharing your origin story, the dramaticness, the pivotalness,
Yes.
and the gracefulness. I am so grateful to have spent this time with you. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Neil, for doing what you're doing. Because we know this podcasting helps the world, but podcasting has focused in our community and specifically around inclusion at this time where so many people, colleagues are feeling discouraged. I think bringing it back to where we started is such like a playful way of reminding ourselves how worthy we are and how much more we can do, however we choose to define it. So I'm really grateful to you for just asking me, and whatever you need, I've got you. I'm here for you,
Uh,
and I've got time for you.
oh,
So
I have abundance of time for you, and I really hope to see you when you're next in London. Yeah, thank you so much.
thank you, Neil.
Thank you so much to Maylis for sharing your origin story with me. You can really see and hear how little Maylis and this strong sense of self has been present throughout her life. And at times that hasn't been particularly easy. There have been some traumatic moments that Maylis has experienced where perhaps that sense of self has got lost along the way, um, hindered by feelings of not belonging and upheaval. And yet you can still see how Maylis has stayed herself, has stayed present, and come into who she is and how that has driven her persistence and dedication to creating inclusive spaces and to shine a light on people's stories. I am, as I said, immeasurably grateful to have spent this time with her. I hope that you have managed to take care of yourself during this episode and that you've taken a lot from it. Maylis, thank you. Maylis's story that she sums up as dramatic, pivotal, and graceful. And I can see all of those things. And Maylis, I see your story, I hear your story, I feel your story. And I'm sure everyone that has listened has too. Thank you so much for taking time to listen. Please like and share this with anyone you feel might be interested. And thanks for listening to Pause and Rewind. Cheers.